basically about the empty shelves. And I think we know we can see for ourselves that there's lots of supermarkets up and down the country that are struggling because of their reliance upon lorry drivers. Many of them have gone back to the EU and haven't returned. Obviously, with the COVID situation and constantly being pinged by their mobile phone and whatever, and having to take time off. So we know that there's essential difficulties that are taking place. We've also seen the lack of CO2 that this country is able to get its hands on now in terms of certain productions of animals, etc. And I'll hold my hands up here, and to be from a vegetarian stroke vegan perspective, I think it's a great idea if people suddenly have to find alternatives to meat. And one of the outcomes of CO2 reductions in the production process is that outcome. But the thing that I really want to focus on very, very briefly is this idea that pushed forward by very extremists on the right, and whether they're Brexiteers, whether they're Leavers, whatever you want to call them, that are arguing that the same situation is existing across Europe. And again, they're telling that big lie in order for people to think, oh, it's not just here. It's not just Tory Brexit. It's not just the way in which the government is managing the infrastructure. It is a massive...
In that interview I was talking about, Johnson talked about it. It's a global problem. It's a global distribution problem. They keep using those terms for hoodwink. That's right.
Yeah, and yet you talk to people.
It's quite funny, given that we haven't got any gas. But anyway,
you talk to people in Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Portugal, Spain. Everything's hunky dory, yeah.
Yeah.
They might not rate their supermarkets, and they might not think their supermarkets are that much, but they're saying the shelves are still fully stacked. All the fruit and veg is still coming in. There's nothing lacking. So why it is that they think that they can get away with, again, telling this massive porky that it's not Brexit, it's not their management, it's everybody's problem. Because at some point it comes back to bite you, because people think, actually, he's lying again, or they are lying again, and they're repeating this mantra. And the problem isn't solved, apart from how they would like to perceive it to be solved. All it is the public are just fed yet more nonsense.
More lies, yeah. I mean, they carry out disastrous policies, policies that are damaging to people, that hurt people's lives, that affect their quality of life detrimentally. We've had 11 years of policies that, for the majority of the population of this country, policies are really bad for their life, in all aspects of their life. And health, housing, economy, but money in their pocket, but all sorts of things that affect the quality of their life, cutting of services, etc. Meanwhile, we're paying more and more and more for housing, for shopping, for utilities, for petrol, for everything. So people are really suffering economically, and of course they're told to blame immigrants for that rather than this government's policies. But we see what happens is they carry out these policies and they find ways to hide the negative effects and promote some false positive effects. So we had the government churning out with their newspaper allies, with the Express running the front page headline about this brilliant Brexit benefit, that we can have the Queen's stamp on the pint glass again. We can have the Crown stamp on a pint glass in your pub again. One of the huge benefits of Brexit, that is. Meanwhile, there's no food on the shelves, and people their gas bills have gone up 200%. It's sickening, absolutely sickening. And people really need to wake up to what's happening there. That they're being, it's amusing to say, but they're being gaslit. I wonder if we're, if there's literally we run out of gas for people to use, I wonder if the government can still gaslight people. Maybe not. Perhaps that's our hope. When the gas runs out, the government won't be able to gaslight people.
Brilliant. Yeah.
It's staggering how the benefits of Brexit, such a joke, are presented. you know, and the true effects are hidden. It's really shocking.
Yeah, and here is just a excuse me, a few of examples. Even our crappy Intermarché is packed. Loads of French and international products. Even Les Isles Britanniques is a clever pun, pinched from Leclerc and packed. Rempli des produits, c'est qualité de l'Inde, nord et sud. One has to grimace. I mean, obviously, it's obviously French, but the thing is that what they're talking about here is that we're being compared to the French. We've obviously got this issue with the French at the moment, apparently over the nuclear submarines in Australia and the US trade deal, or sorry, warmongering deal, I should say, that's been done, moving away from the diesel submarines to nuclear submarines, etc. And it's always about picking a fight with somebody, isn't it? It's always about saying, look, all those nasty frogs now. Then it'll be those nasty eye ties, and then it'll be nasty somebody else and nasty somebody else. It's always the way in which you manage the nation state by saying, we aren't the problem.
Absolutely.
And yet people in France, Tom, people in France and people in Portugal, Belgium, Luxembourg, Canada, Australia, wherever, they are getting propagandized in a completely different way. So it's not like this objective reality is being imposed on planet Earth and everybody's like, oh, taking on the information, using their skill set and all unity. It's not about that. It's about divide, 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 divide. And then when we want a war, war. Then when we want peace, 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 peace. And we're all being controlled like little puppets, like little mannequins.
Absolutely right, Jace. And, you know, combined with that divide and blame, scapegoating message, you know, and the racism that comes with hating on other countries, hating on immigrants, hating on the French, hating on the Germans, whatever, that xenophobia. That's also about creating outrage, you know, and it's something that the right wing and the media in cahoots have really majored in over the last 10 years or so. In America, you know, a big part of Trumpism was about creating outrage amongst his supporters, and a sense of outrage combined with a sense of grievance. Something's been taken from me. That, you know, it's not just blame, it's also those people are trying to take the message from Trump to his supporters was often those people there, those brown people or those Democrats, they're trying to take something of yours, something that belongs to you. They're trying to take it. Trust me, you know, vote for me. I'm the one that's going to stop them, you know, and that creating that sense of outrage and grievance is what right-wing demagogues specialize in, supported by their media, newspaper, and, you know, in America, Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, etc. Promote those messages all the time, creating this constant grievance, and from that grievance they create real hatred, you know. And, you know, there's been numerous articles now by people in America. There was a very, very good article in a publication called The Salon a few years ago. But there's been several of these articles which by people in their sort of 40s, you know, 40s, maybe even 50s, describing how they have lost their parents to Fox News, how they previously had loving, compassionate, kind, good, decent people as parents, until they reached kind of retirement age and then spent 5 or 6 hours a day watching Fox News, and have become nasty, racist, prejudiced, you know, grievance-filled, hate-filled people who they've completely lost their relationship with their parents now, because their parents have become these really nasty, hate-filled people, having watched 5 or 6 hours of Fox News every day. There's numerous articles about that, and they're truly heartbreaking. But I think important for people to read those articles, realize the effect that you know, media like Fox News have. You know, it's one of the things that's a danger with GB News here and the potential Rupert Murdoch, which is still, you know, quite feasible, a Rupert Murdoch-led TV channel here. So yeah, and the damage that that causes to our society, to people's lives, to people, to our society. You know, they major in hate. That's what they do, creating grievance and hate.
And it's not new. War is peace, ignorance is strength, slavery is freedom. We've heard it all before.
Yeah.
And that leads us beautifully into the next section, which is a very short clip, short video, but I think probably one of the most profound 2.5 minutes that anybody at this point in time can experience. We are talking about the way in which behavioral science, behavioral psychology is now being used explicitly to manipulate us as a population. Have a listen to this.
In psychological warfare, what's been done to us these past 18 months, and you've had experts in these fields coming out of organisations like SAGE, Behavioural Insights Team, and of course Tavistock, and their full-time job is to manipulate the human psyche. It's what they do, and they're very, very good at it. And so they've been using things like this technique known as confusion marketing, which is used in the advertising industry, and that deliberately bombards the consumer with conflicting messages. So they're told one thing 1 minute and something completely different the next, which is the polar opposite of it. Sound familiar to anyone? Yeah. And this is what's being done to us now. The government will tell you one thing 1 minute, we're not going to jab 12 to 15-year-old kids, and the very next day they'll come out and say, actually we are. And they know exactly what they're doing. A lot of people think it's down to Boris Johnson being this bumbling oaf and it's the government being incompetent. They're not being incompetent. They're just following the script that's being given to them by these behavioural psychologists and these sick, demented freaks coming out of SAGE and these other places. And that's what's being done to us. And I think a lot of people have just been holding tight, hoping that things will get back to normal, thinking that if they wear their mask, take their jab, stand in line behind the bits of tape at the supermarket, do everything the government tells them, then we can get back to normal. But it must be slowly dawning on people that it's not the plan for things to ever get back to normal. I don't think any of us expected to be living this way. And the interesting thing is that I've been researching all this stuff for 11 years myself. And I realised that when you look at somebody like your dad, who's been doing it for 30 plus years, that's not very long, but still, you know, 11 years is what it is.
It's a long time, yeah.
And even with all the foreknowledge that I had of these groups and networks that run things from behind the scenes and preside over every aspect of our lives, I never imagined that they would go for it in the way that they did in early 2020 and throw everything they've got at us. And it does speak of desperation on their part. It does speak of them deviating from their normal way of doing things, which is in slow, steady, incremental steps. So if anything, I guess we have to draw some optimism from the fact that they appear to be panicking and they appear to be worrying that they're not going to get all the pieces in place for where they want to take things in time for 2030. They've overreached.
So what he's basically arguing here, Tom, is clearly that it's a manufactured response, not only to COVID, but over years and years and years, in order to control millions and millions of people. They have to use behavioural science, and they have used behavioural science, and they've been using it since, you know, Saatchi and Saatchi and the advertising schemes of the 1980s, and probably, you know, long before that. Certainly in advertising they have, but I'm talking more about in government. So what they're now doing is they're consciously giving contradictory messages very, 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 very close together, so that people then enter into this vacuum, which is then filled with a whole number of things: ignorance, fear, frustrations, anger, stress. And as a result of that, you can then pod people. Instead of having this unity across society, everybody comes together and say, oh, we're all being stung. What it is you have small pods of people who are worried about their universal credit being dropped £20 a week. You have other people who are worrying about, their gas bills going up. You have other people worried about, oh, whether I should wear a mask because I have underlying health issues compared to those who don't have underlying health issues, and the whole COVID thing. In terms of climate change, you have, on the one hand, you have people like you said earlier, like Trump saying, oh, we had a really cold winter in New York, which then contradicts the warming up of the ice caps, the melting of the glaciers, the rising of the seawater, etc., etc. So you have this constant contradictory thing. So sometimes we're looking at these people like Trump and Johnson and Farage and many others, and we're thinking, you're absolutely stupid. But what's being said to us here is not stupidity, it's an organized strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. A bit like I said earlier, we're forever thinking, is this government inept, incompetent, or are they evil? Are their actions deliberate, or are their actions their policies and actions which are harmful to the majority of our population? Are they implementing those through ineptitude, through incompetence? Are they really incompetent, or are they know what they're doing? They're doing these things deliberately. Like I say, you tend to end up thinking it can be a bit of both. Sometimes they are truly inept and incompetent, but most of the time, no. As you say, most of the time it is deliberate. Their policies are harmful to the majority, but hugely beneficial to a small few of wealthy people that support the Tories and donate vast sums to them and keep them in power and control the media to tell everyone what a great job they're doing. They know what they're doing, and they obviously have these psychologists telling them how the public will respond and how best to manipulate the public through these chaotic kind of messaging. Yeah.
If we're going to get rid of them, Tom, which strategy would you choose? Would you choose to put even though it's not necessarily all of this, would you put forward a strategy to tell the rest of the public that they are inept, they are corrupt, they are, they don't know what they're doing, they're making up as they go along? Or is the strategy to try and educate people that it's all part of a grand strategy? Because my problem is that once you go into the grand strategy argument, which we know now exists, it becomes classified as conspiracy theory. So it's just booted out the window. It's shot down by that one phrase. So it's actually easier for us to say, oh, I don't want all that hassle. We'll go down another path, which is to say they're corrupt and incompetent.
Yeah. Well, you're right, Jace. To answer your question, I think that the number one way that the Conservatives might be forced out of office, one way or another, either by losing an election or by being kind of forced into, a resignation, is for mass, maybe through mass action like general strikes. But I think that the way that will happen is to focus on their corruption. I've said for several years now, particularly in the last 18 months during the pandemic, where they've, the level of corruption has been on an unprecedented scale, where they're giving enormous sums, vast sums of public money to their wealthy mates under the guise of COVID contracts. The only thing that they've done well during the entire, because I'm not giving them credit for the vaccine, because that's been our NHS and an army of volunteers that have delivered the vaccine to people. So the NHS that they're trying to destroy in the process of destroying. So I'm not even going to give them credit for that. The only thing they've done well during the pandemic has been giving vast sums of money to their rich mates and donors, who of course give some of it back. So the level of corruption is the thing that I think may bring them down.
But we've known about the level of corruption again since the 1980s. You know, Thatcher brought all this to a head because so many people started to realise how they were being played. And yet, can I just say, Tom, out of the 42 years since 1979, we know all this, we put it out there. Obviously, social media is helping, but we put it out there for 42 years, and yet the only alternative to that has been a Blair government, and they've only had 13 years in power in that time.
Yeah.
So 29 years, all those elections, and all those electors have fallen for it. Over and over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. Sadly so. We've had, you know, I mean, no political party has won an election and formed a government in this country since 1974 without the support of the Sun newspaper. Unbelievable, shocking, staggering statistic. And yeah, so we've had, you know, nearly 30 years, you know, since 79, nearly 30 years of
40 years.
Nearly 30 years of Conservatives.
Oh, sorry, Conservatives, yeah, absolutely.
13,
yes.
13 years of sort of Tory light.
Yes.
New Labour, you know, that included joining in the Iraq War. So, yeah. And sorry, I was just going to say the thing that finally brought down the Conservative government after 17 years, 18 years of Conservative government with Thatcher and then Major, the thing that finally really brought them down, it was to some extent New Labour, Tony Blair and Murdoch giving them his support, lending them, because they obviously promised to, you know, to not reverse the damaging you know, policies that destroyed the power of the unions and the working to benefit working people. And you know, obviously Blair made him lots of other promises about enabling him and his mates to carry on making obscene wealth. Anyway, but one of the as well as that Tory government were just absolutely embroiled in corruption and scandal after scandal after scandal. And I've always maintained that that was one of the biggest reasons why they finally got kicked out after about 18 years in power. You know, a couple of them were in prison. You know, Jeffrey Archer, Jonathan Aitken ended up in prison. There were others that, you know, scandals with, you know, sex scandals with, you know, male sex workers with their secretaries. You know, there was just scandal after scandal after scandal within the cabinet of that Tory government, and eventually that contributed at least to their losing the election in '97. I honestly think that the most likely way that this current Conservative government will fall is when people wake up to the huge astronomical levels of corruption that they have implemented.
Yeah, but they're gonna need to rely upon independent media, aren't they? Because they're not going to get it from the corporate mainstream. So please, for viewers, please spread the word about the independent media, because they're the only ones who are seriously taking this, you know, as a major point that needs to be recognised. Because the corporate billionaire media simply don't want to know if it means that they lose their sugar daddies.